大家晚上好啊！今天是哄睡台，讲话要小小声的。Venta 晚上好，尤教授晚上好，韭菜小黄晚上好，龙儿晚上好，准时下班，恭喜！楼顶色泪路过安安晚上好，早安早安晚上好。这样讲话好不习惯哦，10点睡不着，确实耶，应该没有人10点睡觉的，太早了。喂喂安安晚上好。但我其实刚刚有点想睡了，今天早上6点起床，到现在都还没有睡觉。啊嗨嘿早，晚上好。现在是你的活动时间，现在才刚起来嗨是不是？明天放假不会早睡，好好哦。我明天有课，算是下午才有课。我原本想说那个今天是要念英文故事书，我是不是开头要讲英文？但是想说算了，我英文太烂了，不要讲英文，直接变搞笑台。好喂，大家10点才正要起来嗨吼，不要对你有刻板印象。你的刻板印象是那个吗？英文很差，还是都不睡觉？我今天那个下课的时候才跑去图书馆借书，这本书是那个夏绿蒂的网，蛮经典的小说，给小朋友读的小说。虽然我自己是没有看过啦，你们有人看过这本书吗？它是不是有出过电影啊？然后这本书意外的比我想象中还要厚，不知道什么时候才会念完。安安莉亚晚上好，我们今天要来念英文小说《夏绿蒂的王》Charlotte's Web 好，那我们就直接开始念书咯。念书我可能就不太会看聊天室，大家就边听边挂台边睡觉啊。睡着看是你们先睡着还是我先睡着。好，那我们就开始咯。 Chapter 1 Before Breakfast. Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the hoghouse, replied Mrs. Arable. Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it. Do away with it? Shrieked Fern. You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others? Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't wail, Fern, she said. Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway. Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet, and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. 我现在才念完第1页，听不懂，没关系，我们不需要听懂，我们只是要听个睡觉。还是你们想要讲完1页就讲一下故事内容？第1页就是女主角还在跟家人一起准备早餐的时候，看到她爸爸拿着一把斧头去养猪场，然后女主角问说，为什么爸爸要拿着斧头去养猪场？然后她妈说，因为有一只小猪，它长得太弱小了，所以很常生病，他爸爸就要把那只小猪杀掉。所以那个女儿觉得很震惊，她觉得怎么可以这样？那是生命耶，不可以杀掉它。第1页大概是这样的故事。是我来安安晚上好，小七晚上好，差不多大家都要睡着了。那我们继续咯。Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arable stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you will have to learn to control yourself. Control myself? Yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself? Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a little of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now, run alone. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little rounty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I have ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house, and I will bring the runs when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There, inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death. And may the good Lord forgive you for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered. Oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the curtain carefully. First, she kissed her father. Then, she kissed her mother. Then, she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest from breakfast, said Mrs. Arable. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig, a small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. That's it. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby nursing bottle and rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was skated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. Run, commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out of the road to climb into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was, and how lucky she was to have an entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pig, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. Its name is Wilbur, she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? Wilbur, replied Fern, dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. 我们念完 Chapter 1 听着听着就睡着了，95%能听懂，你的英文太强了吧？阿口晚上好啊，各位睡着了吗？我们要继续咯，外面真的好吵哦。睡着了，还没睡着了，真是居然还没睡， 我决定我今天大概念个一半就差不多了。好，我们要进到1之2第2节。Wilbur. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held a bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time, and again just before going to bed. Mrs. Arable gave him a feeding around noontime each day. When Fern was away in school, Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in the box near the stove in the kitchen. Then, when Mrs. Arable complained, he was moved to a bigger room in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Arable fixed a small yard specially for Wilbur under an apple tree, and gave him a large wooden box full of straw, with a doorway cut in it so he could walk in and out as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No," said her father. "You watch and see what he does." Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her, and she held the bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily into the box. Fern peered through the door. Wilbur was poking the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her till the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around a turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up in his yard. But as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out, and he would follow her around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came down again. If she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put him in the carriage alongside the doll. He liked this, and if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed, because his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly so as not to wake her infant. One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the brook, Wilbur waded in with her. He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook, where it was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers call a spring pig, which simply means that he was born in springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arable said he was now big enough to sell and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased. He was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arable was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said. "You have had your fun raising a baby pig. But Wilbur is not a baby any longer, and he has got to be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," suggested Mrs. Arable to Fern. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him as often as you like." "How much money should I ask for him?" Fern wanted to know. "Well," said her father, "he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig yourself for $6, and see what he says." It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer. And Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard that the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree, and he went to leave a manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. 我们念完第2节了。稍微翻译一下故事内容。刚刚讲到那个他的女儿不希望小猪被卖掉嘛，所以呢，他就跟他的爸爸说不可以杀掉它，我要养它。所以呢，他爸爸就让他继续养这只小猪，然后他养得很开心，每天放学都会喂它，然后跟他一起在草地玩耍，一起游泳，一起玩泥巴，对，养得肥肥的。所以刚才故事讲到大概 Wilbur 5周大的时候呢，他的爸爸觉得养得够肥了，差不多可以杀掉了。但是女主角当然不愿意嘛，毕竟都养了5个礼拜了。吃了吧？没有。哇，变培根，糟糕，变早餐了。对，后来他把 Wilbur 卖去他的 Uncle Homer 家里。Uncle Homer 是养猪的，他说卖去他那边，你每天都可以去看他哟。不可以变成培根，太过分了。来偷喝水一下。 每天去大卖场看它。你说全联那个五花肉或是猪里脊吗？每100公克65元。我们这是温馨故事，这是温馨的故事。没有任何一只猪受到伤害哦。好，我们来念第3节。Escape. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay, and it smelled of manure. It smelled of the perspiration of tired horses and the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had a sort of peaceful smell, as though nothing bad could happen ever again in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing, and the axle grease and of rubber boots, of the new rope. And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish, but mostly it smelled of hay. For there was always hay in the great loft overhead, and there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. 好像猫咪在外面乱叫。The barn was pleasantly warm in winter, when the animals spent most of their time indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in summer, when the big doors stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for the cows, a sheepfold down below for the sheep, a pigeon down below the of Wilbur, and it was full of all sorts of things that you find in barns: ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, scythes, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows like to build their nest in. It was the kind of barn that children like to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Home Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile is a good place to keep a young pig. Pig need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded, and she placed the tool in the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese, who lived with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to get into the pigeon. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting there, right outside his pen. But he never had any fun, no walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old. He wandered out into his small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. "There's never anything to do around here," he thought. He walked slowly to his food trough and sniffed to see if anything had been overlooked at lunch. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed to the top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still, tired of lying down. "I'm less than 2 months old, and I'm tired of living," he said. He walked out to the yard again. "When I'm out here," he said, "there's no place to go but in. When I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out in the yard." "That's where you're wrong, my friend," said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw the goose standing there. "You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard," said the goose, who talked rather fast. "One of the boards is loose. Push on it. Push, push, push on it, and come out." "What?" said Wilbur. "Say it slower." At the risk of repeating myself," said the goose, "I suggest that you come on out. It's wonderful out here." "Did you say a board was loose?" That I did, said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence and saw that the goose was right. One board was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed. The board gave way. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. "How does it feel to be free?" she asked. "I like it," said Wilbur. "That is, I guess I like it." Actually, Wilbur felt queer to be outside his fence, with nothing between him and the big world. "Where do you think I'd better go?" Anywhere you like, said the goose. "Go down through the orchard, root up the sod. Go down through the garden, dig up the radishes. Root up everything. Eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over. Skip and dance, jump and prance. Go down through the orchard and stroll in the woods. The world is a wonderful place when you're young." "I can see that," replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, looked all around, sniffed the smells of afternoon, and then set off walking down through the orchard. Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the man. "Homer!" she cried. "Pigs out! Larvae! Pigs out! Homer, Larry peeks out. He's down there under that apple tree. Now the trouble starts, thought Wilbur. Now I'll catch it. The goose heard the racket and she too started hollering. Run, run, run. Downhill. Make for the woods, the woods. She shouted to Wilbur. They'll never, never, never catch you in the woods. The Cocker Spaniel heard the commotion and he ran out of the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out of the machine shade where he was mending a tool. The hireman, Larry, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked toward Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyway, he had never been down there in the woods and wasn't sure he would like it. Get around behind him, Larry, said Mr. Zuckerman, and drive him toward the barn. And take it easy, don't rush him. I'll go and get a bucket of slops. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. Whenever any creature broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cows that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses, in their stalls in the barn, pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering. And soon, the horses had caught on to what was happening. Wilbur's out, they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and became excited to know that one of his friends had got free and was no longer penned up and tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was after him. If this is what it's like to be free, he thought, I believe I'd rather be penned up in my own yard. The Cocker Spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Larry, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started for the garden. And now, Mr. Zuckerman was coming down toward him, carrying a pail. This is really awful, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? He began to cry. The goose took command and began to give orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about, cried the goose. Skip around, run toward me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make for the woods, twist and turn. The Cocker Spaniel sprang Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran. Larry reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Larry. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Larry's legs. Larry missed Wilbur and grabbed the spaniel instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run toward me, yelled the gardeners. Run down hills, suggested the cows. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Look out for Larry, called the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by the hullabaloo. He didn't like being the center of all his views. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he ran downhill and uphill at the same time, and he couldn't turn and twist when he was jumping and dancing, and he was crying so hard he could barely see anything that was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in her arms and comfort him. When he looked out and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's corn flakes, and the popover left from Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step toward the pail. No, said the goose. It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pail. Pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly toward the barnyard, looking out about him innocently, as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following along behind him. You'll be sorry, called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward the pail of slops. You'll miss your freedom, honked the goose. An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops. Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and pulled the slops into the trough. Then he pulled the loose board away from the fence, so that there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider, cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the popover. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8 penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned dazedly on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. He's quite a pig, said Lurvy. Yes, he'll make a good pig, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard a word of praise. He felt the warm milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. I'm really too young to go out in the world alone, he thought as he lay down. 我们念完第3章了，还醒着吗？聊天室真的冻结了，确实。 真的很好睡耶，我自己听着听着也很想睡觉。今天是挂睡台，仰着睡觉。而且刚刚那个救护车经过，直接盖住我的声音，有够大声。我现在大概念完1/10本书，好多，太多了吧？真的是只能念完半本呢。好，我们来继续第4章 Chapter 4。我是不是应该要讲一下前面发生什么事情？刚刚前面 Wilbur 被送到那个 Uncle Homer 的农场，然后呢，他在那边认识了很多动物，有鹅啊、牛啊，还有羊跟鸡，满满的动物。然后有一天，有一只鹅告诉 Wilbur：“ 你想出来是不是？你去动一下那块板子，那块板子松掉了。”所以 Wilbur 就从那块板子里面跑出来，然后这边逛大街，到处跑跑跳跳。结果呢，就被农场主人、农场的夫人发现了，然后他就大喊：“猪跑出来啦！赶快去把猪抓回来！”然后就开始了一个那什么鸡飞狗跳、兵荒马乱。对，到处那个农场的人都在抓 Wilbur， 就最后 Wilbur 被食物骗回去了。他们帮他准备了饲料、牛奶，然后 Wilbur 就乖乖的回去了。然后最后农场的人说了一句：“果然是猪欸。”被嘲笑了啦，果然是猪，看到吃的就马上回来了。然后那只鹅还说：“你不要自由了吗？难道你要放弃自由了吗？”然后 Wilbur 说：“我宁愿放弃自由，我也要吃东西。”真不愧是猪。好，再来第4章是 Loneliness， 孤单寂寞。The next day was rainy and dark. Rain fell on the roof of the barn and drifted steadily from the eaves. Rain fell in the barnyard and ran in cooked courses down into the land where thistles and pigweed grew. Rain spattered against Mrs. Zuckerman's kitchen windows and came gushing out of the downspouts. Rain fell on the back of the sheep as they gazed in the meadow. When the sheep tired of standing in the rain, they walked slowly up land and into the fold. Rain upset Wilbur's plans. Wilbur had planned to go out this day and dig a new hole in his yard. He had other plans too. His plans for the day went something like this: breakfast at 6:30, skim milk, crust, middlings, bits of donuts, wheat cakes with drops of maple syrup sticking to them, potato skins, leftover custard, pudding with raisins, and bits of shredded wheat. breakfast would be finished at 7. From 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Templeton. The rat lived under his trough. Talking with Templeton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than nothing. From 8 to 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap outdoors in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig a hole or trench and possibly find something good to eat buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, he planned to stand still and watch flies on the boards, watch bees in the clover, and watch swallows in the air. 12 o'clock, lunchtime, middlings, warm water, apple parings, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scrap, staple hominy, and a wrapper of a packaged cheese. Lunch would be over at 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. From 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places by rubbing against the fence. From 3 to 4, he planned to stand perfectly still and think of what it was like to be alive, and to wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper: skim milk, provender, leftover sandwich from Lover's lunchbox, prune skins, a morsel of this, a bit of that, fried potatoes, marmalade, drippings, a little more of this, a little more of that, a piece of baked apple, a scrap of upside-down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans. He awoke at 6 and saw Lorraine, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. "I get everything all beautifully planned out, and it has to go and rain," he said. For a while, he stood gloomily indoors. Then he walked to the door and looked out. Drops of rain struck his face. His yard was cold and wet. His trough had an inch of rainwater in it. Templeton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Templeton?" called Wilbur. There was no answer. Suddenly, Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. "One day just like another," he groaned. "I'm very young. I have no real friend here in the barn. It's going to rain all morning and all afternoon. And from what's coming, such bad weather. Oh, honestly." And Wilbur was crying again, for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard a banging of a pail. Derby was standing outside in the rain, stirring up breakfast. "Come on, pig," said Derby. Wilbur did not budge. Derby jumped the slopes, scraped the pail, and walked away. He noticed that something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. He mentioned this to the goose, who was sitting quietly in a corner of the sheepfold. "Will you come over and play with me?" he asked. "Sorry, Sonny, sorry," said the goose. "I'm sitting on my eggs. 8 of them. Got to keep them toasty, warm. I had to stay right here. I'm no flipperty, gibbet. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings. Well, I didn't think you were expecting woodpeckers, said Wilbur bitterly. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. Will you please play with me? He asked. Certainly not, said the lamb. In the first place, I cannot get into your pen, as I am not old enough to jump over the fence. In the second place, I am not interested in pigs. Pig means less than nothing to me. What do you mean less than nothing? Replied Wilbur. I don't think there is any such thing as less than nothing. Nothing is absolutely the limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can something be less than nothing? If there were something that was less than nothing, then nothing would be nothing. It would be something. Even though it's just a very little bit of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that is less than it is. Oh, be quiet, said the dam. Go play by yourself. I don't play with pigs. Sadly, Wilbur lay down and listened to the rain. Soon, he saw the rats climbing down aslantingly. 什么 nothing nothing 我也觉得好多 nothing Will you play with me, Templeton? Asked Wilbur. Play, said Templeton, twiddling his whiskers. Play? I hardly know the meaning of the word. Well, said Wilbur, it means to have fun, to frolic, to run and skip and make merry. I never do those things if I can avoid them, replied the rats surly. I prefer to spend my time eating, knowing, spying, and hiding. I'm a glutton, but not a merrymaker. Right now, I am on my way to your trough to eat your breakfast, since you haven't got sense enough to eat it yourself. And Templeton, the rat, crept stiffly along the wall and disappeared into a private tunnel that he had dug between the door and the trough in Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a creative rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place under the pig trough without coming out into the open. He had tunnels and runaways all over Mr. Zuckerman's farm, and could get from one place to another without being seen. Usually, he slept during the daytime and was abroad only after dark. Wilbur watched him disappear into his tunnel. In a moment, he saw the rat's sharp nose poke out from underneath the wooden trough. Cautiously, Templeton put himself over the edge of the trough. This was almost more than Wilbur could stand. On the dreary, rainy day, to see his breakfast being eaten by somebody else. He knew Templeton was getting soaked, out there in the pouring rain, but even that didn't comfort him. Friendless, dejected, and hungry, he threw himself down in the manure and sobbed. Late that afternoon, Derby went to Mr. Zuckerman. I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hasn't touched his food. Giving 2 spoons of sulfur and a little matchless, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him, when Derby caught him and forced the medicine down his throat. This was certainly the worst day of his life. He didn't know whether he could endure the awful loneliness anymore. Darkness settled over everything. Soon, there were only shadows and noises of the sheep chewing their cuds, and occasionally the rattle of the cow chain up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when, out of the darkness, came a small voice he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin, but pleasant. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur?" it said. "I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day, and I like you." "But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping to his feet. "Where are you? And who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." 我念完第4章了，我的主角夏绿蒂终于要出来了。Do you want a friend? 你们需要一个朋友吗？ I can be your friend. 需要，谢谢，没问题。聊天室开放，以下开放交友真友。上次啊哈也还在那边跟早安当朋友了，耶！大家都是朋友，还是你们也要跟夏绿蒂当朋友？还是你们想要跟 Wilbur 当朋友？一只猪，一只猪和一只蜘蛛。他当我老婆，你说谁当你老婆？猪吗？你该不要把人家做成梅花肉吧？夏绿蒂当你老婆，可以哦。那首先你要养一只蜘蛛。前阵子我家出现了一只拉牙，然后它总是神出鬼没的，一下出现在房间的墙上，一下要跑到浴室的洗手台，每天都在想还要跑去哪了，该不会晚上爬到我的床上跟我一起睡觉，超可怕。虽然都说拉牙会帮忙吃蟑螂，但是先不要，好可怕。请他默默的在角落做自己的事情，不要被我看到。他一定喜欢我，他一定想跟我当朋友，他也要那个等我半夜感到寂寞的时候，突然对我说一句 "Do you want a friend?" 好可怕哦！他要出来给我夸一下，让我说谢谢你，谢谢你平常都帮我吃蟑螂，再多吃点，把你养得肥肥胖胖的。好，我们要继续第5章 Charlotte 夏绿蒂的故事要开始咯。The night seemed long. Wilbur's stomach was empty and his mind was full. And when your stomach is empty and your mind is full, it's always hard to sleep. A dozen times during the night, Wilbur walked and stared into the blackness. listening to the sounds and trying to figure out what time it was. A barn is never perfectly quiet. Even at midnight, there is usually something stirring. The first time he woke, he heard Templeton gnawing a hole in the grain bin. Templeton's teeth scraped loudly against the wood and made quite a racket. "That crazy rat," thought Wilbur. "Why does he have to stay up all night, grinding his clashes and destroying people's property? Why can't he go to sleep, like any decent animal?" The second time Wilbur woke, he heard the goose turning on her nest and chuckling to herself. "What time is it?" whispered Wilbur to the goose. Probably about 11:30, said the goose. "Why aren't you asleep, Wilbur?" "Too many things on my mind," said Wilbur. "Well," said the goose, "that's not my trouble. I have nothing at all on my mind, but I've too many things under my behind. Have you ever tried to sleep while sitting on 8 eggs?" "No," replied Wilbur. "I suppose it is uncomfortable. How long does it take a goose egg to hatch?" Approximately 30 days, all told," answered the goose. "But I cheat a little. On one afternoon, I just pour a little straw over the egg and go out for a walk." Wilbur yawned and went back to sleep. In his dreams, he heard again the voice saying, "I'll be the friend to you. Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." About half an hour before dawn, Wilbur woke and listened. The barn was still dark. The sheep lay motionless. Even the goose was quiet. Overhead, on the main floor, nothing stirred. The cows were resting. The horses dozed. Templeton had quite woke and gone off somewhere on an errand. The only sound was a slight scraping noise from the rooftop, where the weather van swung back and forth. Wilbur loved the barn when it was like this, calm and quiet, waiting for light. Day is almost here, he thought. Through a small window, a faint gleam appeared. One by one, the stars went out. Wilbur could see the goose a few feet away. She sat head tucked under a wing. Then he could see the sheep and the lambs. The sky lightened. "Oh, beautiful day! It is here at last. Today I shall find my friend." Wilbur looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window's ledge, stared up at the ceiling, but he saw nothing new. Finally, he decided he would have to speak up. He hated to break the lovely stillness of dawn by using his voice, but he couldn't think of any other way to locate the mysterious new friend who was nowhere to be seen. So Wilbur cleared his throat. "Attention, please," he said in a loud, firm voice. "Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly make himself or herself known by giving an appropriate sign or signal?" Wilbur paused and listened. All the other animals lifted their head and stared at him. Wilbur blushed. but he was determined to get in touch with his unknown friend. "Attention, please," he said. "I will repeat the message. Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly speak up? Please tell me where you are, if you are my friend." The sheep looked at each other in disgust. "Stop your nonsense, Wilbur," said the oldest sheep. "If you have a new friend here, you are probably disturbing his rest. And the quickest way to spoil your friendship is to wake somebody up in the morning before he is ready. How can you be sure your friend is an early riser?" "I beg everyone's pardon," whispered Wilbur. "I didn't mean to be objectionable." He lay down meekly in the manure, facing the door. He did not know it, but his friend was very near. And the old sheep was right, the friend was still asleep. Soon, Lurvy appeared with slops for breakfast. Wilbur rushed out, ate everything in a hurry, and licked the trough. The sheep moved down off the land, and Gander waddled along behind them, pulling grass. And then, just as Wilbur was settling down for his morning nap, he heard again a thin voice that had addressed him the night before. "Salutations," said the voice. Wilbur jumped to his feet. "What?" he cried. "Salutations," repeated the voice. "What are they? And where are you?" screamed Wilbur. Please tell me where you are. And what are salutations?" "Salutations are greetings," said the voice. "When I say salutations, it's just my fancy way to saying hello or good morning. Actually, it's a silly expression, and I'm surprised that I used it at all. As for my whereabouts, that's easy. Look up here in the corner of the doorway. Here I am. Look, I'm waving." At last, Wilbur saw the creature that had spoken to him in such a kindly way. Stretched across the upper part of the doorway was a big spider web, and hanging from the top of the web, head down, was a large gray spider. She was about the size of a gumdrop. She had 8 legs, and she was waving one of them at Wilbur in friendly greeting. "See me now?" she asked. "Oh, yes, indeed," said Wilbur. "Yes, indeed. How are you? Good morning. Salutations. Very pleased to meet you. What is your name, please? May I have your name?" "My name," said the spider, "is Charlotte." "Charlotte what?" asked Wilbur eagerly. "Charlotte A. Kavatika, but just call me Charlotte." "I think you're beautiful," said Wilbur. "Well, I'm pretty," replied Charlotte. "There's no denying that." Almost all spiders were rather nice looking. "I'm not as flashy as some, but I'll do. I wish I could see you, Wilbur, as clearly as you can see me." "Why can't you?" asked the pig. "I'm right here." "Yes, but I'm nearsighted," replied Charlotte. "I've always been dreadfully nearsighted. It's good in some ways, not so good in others. Watch me rap out this fly. A fly that had been crawling along Wilbur's trough had flown up and blundered into the lower parts of Charlotte's webs and was tangled in the sticky threads. The fly was beating its wing furiously, trying to break loose and free itself. "First," said Charlotte, "I dive at him." She plunged headfirst toward the fly. As she dropped, a tiny silken thread unwound from her rear end. "Next, I wrapped him up." She grabbed the fly, threw a few jets of silk around it, and rolled it over and over, wrapping it so that it couldn't move. Wilbur watched in horror. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. And although he detested flies, he was sorry for this one. "There," said Charlotte. "Now I knock him out, so he'll be more comfortable." She beat the fly. "He can't spell a thing now," she remarked. "He'll make a perfect breakfast for me." "You mean you eat flies?" gasped Wilbur. "Certainly. Flies, bugs, grasshoppers, choice beetles, moths, butterflies, tasty cockroaches, gnats, midges, daddy longlegs, centipedes, mosquitoes, crickets, anything that is careless enough to get caught in my web. I have to leave, don't I?" "Why, yes, of course," said Wilbur. "Do they taste good?" "Delicious, of course. I don't really eat them. I drink them, drink their blood." "I love blood," said Charlotte, and her pleasant, thin voice grew even thinner and more pleasant. "Don't say that," groaned Wilbur. "Please don't say things like that." "Why not? It's true, and I have to say what is true. I am not entirely happy about my diet of flies and bugs, but it's the way I'm made. A spider has to pick up a living somehow or other, and I happen to be a trapper. I just naturally build a web and trap flies and other insects. My mother was a trapper before me. Her mother was a trapper before her. All our family have been trappers. Way back for thousands and thousands of years, we spiders have been laying for flies and bugs." "It's a miserable existence," said Wilbur gloomily. He was sad because his new friend was so bloodthirsty. "Yes, it is," agreed Charlotte. "But I can't help it. I don't know how the first spider in the early days of the world happened to think of this fancy idea of spinning a web. But she did, and it was clever of her too. And since then, all of us spiders have had to work the same trick. It's not a bad pitch on the whole." "It's cruel," replied Wilbur, who did not intend to be argued out of his position. "Well, you can't talk," said Charlotte. "You have your meal brought to you in a pail. Nobody feeds me. I have to get my own living. I live by my wits. I have to be sharp and clever, lest I go hungry. I have to think things out, catch what I can, take what comes, and it just so happens, my friend, that what comes is flies and insects and bugs. And furthermore," said Charlotte, shaking one of her legs, Do you realize that if I didn't catch bugs and eat them, bugs would increase and multiply and get so numerous that they destroy the earth, wipe out everything? Really? Said Wilbur. I wouldn't want that to happen. Perhaps your web is a good thing after all. The goose had been listening to the conversation and chuckling to herself. There are a lot of things Wilbur doesn't know about life, she thought. He's really a very innocent little pig. He doesn't even know what's going to happen to him around Christmas time. He has no idea that Mr. Zuckerman and Derby are plotting to kill him. And the goose raised herself a bit and poked her eggs a little further under her so that they would receive the full heat from her warm body and soft feathers. Charlotte stood quietly over the fly, preparing to eat it. Wilbur lay down and closed his eyes. He was tired from his wakeful nights and from the excitement of meeting someone for the first time. A breeze brought him the smell of clover, the sweet-smelling world beyond his fence. Well, he thought, I've got a new friend, all right. But what a gamble friends is. Charlotte is fierce, brutal, scheming, bloodthirsty, everything I don't like. How can I learn to like her? Even though she is pretty and, of course, clever? Wilbur was merely suffering the doubts and fears that often go with finding a new friend. In good time, he was to discover that he was mistaken about Charlotte. Underneath her rather bold and cruel exterior, he had a kind heart, and she was to prove loyal and true to the very end. 第5章，休息一下，到家了，辛苦啦，上班辛苦啦。最近天气冷，火锅店感觉很多人耶。大家都睡着了，还有人醒着吗？没有，真的吗？居然还醒着，我以为你们睡着了。太会撑了吧？怎么还能醒着？好强哦！你们一定都是那种平常上课很专心，就算听老师讲话也不会睡着的学生。但我发现快要念完一半了耶。我们今天要念到哪里嘞？相反吗？你是说听老师睡觉会睡着啊？那怎么听我讲话？哦，你在画画当背景音，不错哎，好赞！希望可以让你有更多灵感。我们来看看今天可以念到哪里。好，继续催眠咯。 Chapter 7，Chapter 6， 我一直念到打结。我其实好多字都是那个根本就不知道怎么念，就随便过去，大家都没有发现哦。Summer days. The early summer days on the farm are happiest and fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet, and then fade. Apple blossoms come with the lilacs, and the bees visit around among the apple trees. 我的背句怎么不见啦？把它找回来。The days grow warm and soft. School ends, and children have time to play and to fish for trout in the brook. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. 刚刚 B 居然睡着了，确实。Now that school was over, Fern visited a barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the 1st of July, the workhorses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning, you could hear the rattle of the machine as they went around and round, while the tall grass fell down behind the cotton bar in long green swatches. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, all hands would help rake and pitch the road, and the hay would be hauled to the barn in the hay-high wagon, with Fern and Avery riding at the top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft, until the whole barn seemed like a wonderful bed and symphony and clover. It was fine to jump in, and perfect to hide in, and sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay, and would add it to the other things in his pocket. Early summer days are the jolly time for the birds. In the fields, around the house, in the barn, in the woods, in the swamp. Everywhere, love and songs and nests and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston coast. Oh, Peabody, 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 on an apple bough. The thief twitters and wags its tail and says, Phoebe, Phoebe. The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude. If you enter in a barn, the swallows swoop down from their nest and scold. Cheeky, cheeky, they say. In early summer, there were plenty of things for a child to eat and drink and suck and chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar. The factory is full of ice-cold drinks. Everywhere you look is life. Even the little bowl of spit on the wheat stalk, if you poke it apart, has a green worm inside it. And on the underside of the leaf of the potato vine are the bright orange eggs of the potato bug. It was on a day in early summer that the goose eggs hatched. This was an important event in the barn cellar. Fern was there, sitting on her stool, When it happened, except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that Gosling had at last arrived. The goose knew a day in advance that they were coming. She could hear their weak voices calling from inside the egg. She knew that they were in a desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break through and get out. So she sat quite still and talked less than usual. When the first gosling poked its gray-green head through the girl's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made an announcement. "I'm sure," she said, "that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks, an unremitting effort and patience on the part of our friends, the goose, she now has something to show for it. The gosling has arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations?" Thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing shamelessly. "Thank you," said the gander. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings are there?" "I can only see 1. "There are 7, said the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte. 7 is a lucky number." "Luck had nothing to do with this," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." At this point, Templeton showed his nose from his hiding place under Wilbur's trough. He blinked at Fern, then crept cautiously toward the goose, keeping close to the wall. Everyone watched him, for he was not well liked, not trusted. "Look," he began in his sharp voice. "You say you have 7 goslings. There were 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch?" "It's a dud, I guess," said the goose. "What are you going to do with it?" continued Templeton, his little round pretty eye fixed on the goose. "You can have it," replied the goose. "Roll it away and add it to that nasty collection of yours." Templeton had a habit of picking up unusual objects around the farm and storing them in his home. He saved everything. Certainly," said the gander. "You may have the egg, but I'll tell you one thing, Templeton. If I ever catch you poking your ugly nose around the gosling, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever took." And the gander opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was so strong and brave. But the truth is, both goose and gander were worried about Templeton. And with good reason. The rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rotten kindness, no compunctions, no higher feelings, no friendliness, no anything. He would kill a gosling if he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everybody knew it. With her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched egg out of the nest, and the entire company watched in disgust while the rat rolled it away. Even Wilbur, who could eat almost anything, was appalled. "Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg," he muttered. "A rat is a rat," said Charlotte. She laughed a twinkling little laugh. "But, my friend, If that ancient egg ever breaks, this barn would be untenable. What's that mean? Asked Wilbur. It means nobody will be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotten egg is a regular stink bomb. I won't break it, snarled Templeton. I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time. He disappeared into his tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged till he succeeded in rolling it to his there under the trough. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, the gray goose let her 7 goslings off and nesting and out into the world. Mr. Zuckerman spied them when he came with Wilbur's supper. Well, hello there, he said, smiling all over. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now isn't that lovely? Yay! 我们念完第6章了。怎么觉得好像越念越快，有吗？念完第6章，快要12点了，还撑得下去吗，各位？真的很佩服你们，这样还能醒着耶。我们就念到12点，念到12点，差不多就可以去睡觉了。居然还在，这么催眠的东西居然还在，太强了！阿口睡着了。我的目的就是要让大家都睡着，这才是哄睡台的意义。外面的车子声音都比我讲话的声音好大声。嘿，晚上好，亲爱的，晚上好，来睡觉咯。还不能睡，为什么？该不会在上班吧？上班偷听哄睡台。那我们来继续第7章。第7章是 Bad News。坏消息，看来 Wilbur 要被干掉了，要被做成培根、里脊、梅花、五花。每位观众都可以吃到一份。现在开放点餐，我要厚切猪排。Wilbur liked Charlotte better and better each day. Her campaign against insects seemed sensible and useful. Hardly anybody around the farm had a good word to say or a fly. Flies spent their time pestering others. The cows hated them. The horses detested them. The sheep laughed at them. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were always complaining about them and putting up screams. Wilbur admired the way Charlotte managed. He was particularly glad that she always put her victim to sleep before eating it. "It's real thoughtful of you to do that, Charlotte," he said. "Yes," she replied in her sweet, musical voice. "I always give them an anesthetic so they won't feel pain. It's a little service I throw in." As the days went by, Wilbur grew and grew. He ate 3 big meals a day. He spent long hours lying on his side, half asleep, dreaming pleasant dreams. He enjoyed good health, and he gained a lot of weight. 变胖咯. One afternoon, when Fern was sitting on her stool, the oldest sheep walked into the barn and stopped to pay a call on Wilbur. "Hello," she said. "Seems to me you're putting on weight." "Yes, I guess I am," replied Wilbur. "At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining." "Just the same, I don't envy you," said the old sheep. "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you?" "No," said Wilbur. "Well, I don't like to spread bad news," said the sheep, "but they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you. That's why." "They're going to what?" screamed Wilbur. Fern grew rigid on her stool. "Kill you. Turn you into smoked bacon and ham," continued the old sheep. "Almost all young pigs get murdered by the farmer as soon as the real cold weather set in. There's a regular conspiracy around here to kill you at Christmas time. Everybody is in the plot. Lurvy, Zuckerman, even John Arable." "Mr. Arable?" sobbed Wilbur. "Fern's father?" "Certainly. When the pig is to be butchered, everybody helps. I'm an old sheep, and I see the same thing, same old business, year after year. Arable arrives with his shoots the..." "Stop!" screamed Wilbur. "I don't want to die. Save me, somebody, save me." Fern was just about to jump up when a voice was heard. "Be quiet, Wilbur," said Charlotte, who had been listening to this awful conversation. "I can't be quiet," screamed Wilbur, raising up and down. "I don't want to be killed. I don't want to die. Is it true what the old sheep says, Charlotte? Is it true they're going to kill me when the cold weather comes?" "Well," said the spider, plucking thoughtfully at her web, "the old sheep has been around this barn a long time. She has seen many a spring pig come and go. If she says they plan to kill you, I'm sure that's true. It's also the dirtiest trick I ever heard of. What people don't think of." Wilbur burst into tears. "I don't want to die," he moaned. "I want to stay alive, right here in my comfortable manure pile with all my friends. I want to breathe the beautiful air and lie in the beautiful sun." "You're certainly making a beautiful noise," snapped the old sheep. "I don't want to die," screamed Wilbur, throwing himself to the ground. "You shall not die," said Charlotte briskly. "What? Really?" cried Wilbur. "Who's going to save me?" I am, said Charlotte. How? Asked Wilbur. That remains to be seen, but I'm going to save you, and I want you to quiet down immediately. You're crying in a childish way. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics. 直接跳第8章。On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. Did you know that Uncle Homer's gosling had hatched? Asked Fern. How many? Asked Mr. Arable. 7, replied Fern. There were 8 eggs, but 1 egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away. The goose did what? Asked Mrs. Arable, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried look. Told Templeton she didn't want the egg anymore, repeated Fern. Who is Templeton? Asked Mrs. Arable. He's the rat, replied Fern. None of us like him much. Who's us? Asked Mr. Arable. Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me. Charlotte? Said Mrs. Arable. Who's Charlotte? She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever. What does she look like? Asked Mrs. Arable. Well, said Fern, thoughtfully, she has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess. Charlotte is a spider? Asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her. Does he really? Said Mrs. Arable, rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte, said Fern. Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched? I haven't the faintest idea, said Mr. Arable. Tell us. Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in a corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, I'm sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks and unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show it. Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? Yes, I do, said Mrs. Arable. And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school. And tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon, you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you? I like it there, replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she had left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. I worry about Fern, she said. Did you hear the way she rambled on about animals, pretending that they talked? Mr. Arable chuckled. Maybe they do talk, he said. I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kid thinks there all sorts of things. Just the same, I do worry about her, replied Mrs. Arable. I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she is acting about that pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk. Mr. Arable grinned. Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's, he said. 我念完第8章。晚上好，小月晚上好。刚刚念到最后，很想打喷嚏，但我觉得如果这么小声呢，就是一直很小声，然后突然打个喷嚏，大家会惊醒。我们今天那个10章，再把9跟10念完，大家就差不多可以睡觉了。Chapter 9 Wilbur's boast. A spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it is made of thin, delicate strands, the web is not easily broken. However, a web gets torn every day by the insects that kick around in it, and the spider must rebuild it when it gets full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked it to sit nearby and watch. One afternoon, she heard a most interesting conversation and witnessed a strange event. "You have awfully hairy eggs, Charlotte," said Wilbur, as the spider busily worked at her task. "My legs are hairy for a good reason," replied Charlotte. "Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 sections: the coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the patella, the tibia, and metatarsus, and the tarsus." Wilbur sat bolt upright. "You're kidding," he said. "No, I'm not either." "Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time." Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus, and tarsus. "Goodness," said Wilbur, looking down at his own choppy legs. "I don't think my leg has 7 sections." "Well," said Charlotte, "you and I lead different lives. You don't have to spin a web. That takes a real leg work."忍不住了，打喷嚏。"Well," said Charlotte, "you and I..." 这边念过了，哎呦。谢谢，不客气。"I could spin the web if I tried," said Wilbur, boasting. "I've just never tried." "Let's see you do it," said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly, and her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. Okay, replied Wilbur. You coach me, and I'll spin one. It must be a lot of fun to spin the web. How do I start? Take a deep breath, said Charlotte. Smiling, Wilbur breathed deeply. Now, climb to the highest place you can get to, like this. Charlotte raced up to the top of the doorway. Wilbur scrambled to the top of the manure pile. Very good, said Charlotte. Now, make an attachment with your spinners, hurl yourself into space, and let out a drag line as you go down. Wilbur hesitated a moment, then jumped out into the air. He glanced hastily behind to see if a piece of rope was following him to check his fall, but nothing seemed to be happening in his rear. And the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. He grunted. Charlotte laughed so hard her web began to sway. What did I do wrong? Asked the pig, when he recovered from his bump. Nothing, said Charlotte. It was a nice try. I think I'll try again, said Wilbur cheerfully. I believe what I need is a little piece of string to help me. The pig walked out to his yard. You there, Templeton, he called. The rat poked his head out from under the trough. Got a little piece of string I could borrow? Asked Wilbur. I needed to spin the web. Yes, indeed, replied Templeton, who saved string. No trouble at all. Anything is obliged. He crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way, and returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur extended. That's just the thing, he said. Tied one end to my tail. Will you, Templeton? Wilbur crouched down with his thin, curly tail toward the rat. Templeton seized the string, passed it around and the end of the pigtails, and tied two half hitches. Charlotte watched in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale foot attracted the flies that she needed, and she was proud to see that he was not a quitter and was willing to try again to spin a web. While the rat and the spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climbed again to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. Everybody watch, he cried, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air. Head first, the string trailed behind him, but as he neglected to fasten the other end to anything, it didn't really do any good, and Wilbur landed with a thud, crushed and hurt. Tears came to his eyes. Templeton grinned. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit she spoke. You can't spin a web, Wilbur, and I advise you to put the idea out of your mind. You lack two things needed for spinning a web. What are they? Asked Wilbur sadly. You lack a set of spinners, and you lack know-how. But cheer up. You don't need a web. Zuckerman supplies you with 3 big meals a day. Why should you worry about trapping food? Wilbur sighed. You're ever so much clever and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I was just trying to show off. Serve me right. Templeton untied his string and took it back to his home. Charlotte returned to her weaving. You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur, she said. Not many creatures can spin web. Even men aren't as good at it as spiders, although they think they're pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensborough Bridge? Wilbur shook his head. Is it a web? Sort of, replied Charlotte. But do you know how long it took a man to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening. What do people catch in the Queensborough Bridge? Bugs? Asked Wilbur. No, said Charlotte. They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there is something better on the other side. If they hang head down at the top and nothing, they wait quietly. Maybe something good will come along. But no. With men, it's rush, rush, rush. Every minute. I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider. What does sedentary mean? Asked Wilbur. Means I sit still a good part of the time and don't go wandering all over creation. I know the good thing when I see it, and my web is a good thing. I stay put and wait for what comes. Give me a chance to think. Well, I sort of sedentary myself, I guess, said the pig. I have to hang around whether I want to or not. You know where I really like to be this evening? Where? In the forest, looking for beech nuts and truffles and delectable roots, pushing leaves aside with my wonderful strong nose, searching and sniffing along the ground, smelling, smelling, smelling. You smell just the way you are, remarked a man who had just walked in. I can smell you from here. You're the smelliest creature in the place. Wilbur hung his head. His eyes grew wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment, and she spoke sharply to the man. Let Wilbur alone, she said. He has a perfect right to smell, considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you are interrupting a very pleasant conversation. What were we talking about, Wilbur, when we were so rudely interrupted? Oh, I don't remember, said Wilbur. It doesn't make any difference. Let's not talk anymore for a while, Charlotte. I'm getting sleepy. You go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening. Wilbur stretched out on his side. Twilight settled over Zuckerman's barn, and a feeling of peace. Fern knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows passed on silent wing, in and out the doorways, bringing food to their young ones. From across the road, a bird sang, "Whippoorwill, whippoorwill." Lowry sat down under an apple tree and lit his pipe. The animal sniffed the familiar smell of strong tobacco. Wilbur heard the trail of the tree, toad, and the occasional slamming of the kitchen door. All these sounds made him feel comfortable and happy, for he loved life and loved to be a part of the world on a summer evening. But as he lay there, he remembered what old chiefs had told him. The thought of death came to him, and he began to tremble with fear. "Charlotte," he said softly. "Yes, Wilbur." "I don't want to die." "Of course you don't," said Charlotte in a comfortable voice. "I just love it here in the barn," said Wilbur. "I love everything about this place." "Of course you do," said Charlotte. "We all do." the goose appeared, followed by her 7 goslings. They thrust their little necks out and kept up a musical whistling, like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the song with love in his heart. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes," said the spider. "Were you serious when you promised me you would keep them from killing me?" "I was never more serious in my life. I am not going to let you die, Wilbur." "How are you going to save me?" asked Wilbur, whose curiosity was very strong on this point. "Well," said Charlotte vaguely, "I don't really know, but I'm working on a plan." "That's wonderful," said Wilbur. "How is the plan coming, Charlotte? Have you got very far with it? Is it coming along pretty well?" Wilbur was trembling again, but Charlotte was cool and collected. "Oh, it's coming all right," she said, lightly. "The plan is still in its early stages and hasn't completely sharpened yet, but I'm working on it." "When do you work on it?" begged Wilbur. "When I'm hanging head down at the top of my web. That's when I do my thinking, because then all the blood is in my head. I'd be only too glad to help it any way I can." "Oh, I'll work it out alone," said Charlotte. "I can think better if I think alone." "All right," said Wilbur, "but don't fail to let me know if there's anything I can do to help, no matter how slight." "Well," replied Charlotte, "you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep, and stop worrying. Never hurry and never worry. Chew your food thoroughly and eat every bit of it. Except you must live just enough for Templeton. Gain weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand?" "Yes, I understand," said Wilbur. "Go along to bed then," said Charlotte. "Sleep is important." Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen and threw himself down. He closed his eyes. In another minute he spoke. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes, Wilbur." "May I go out to my throw to see if I left any in my supper?" "I think I left just a tiny bit of smashed potato." "Very well," said Charlotte. "But I want you in bed again without delay." Wilbur started to race out his yard. "Slowly, slowly," said Charlotte. "Never hurry and never worry." Wilbur checked himself and crept slowly to his floor. He found a bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it, and walked back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a while. "Charlotte," he said in a whisper. "Yes?" "May I get a drink of milk? I think there are a few drops of milk left in my trough." "No, the trough is dry, and I want you to go to sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes and go to sleep." Wilbur shut his eyes. Fern got up from her stool and started from home, her mind full of everything she had seen and heard. "Good night, Charlotte," said Wilbur. "Good night, Wilbur." There was a pause. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Wilbur." "Good night." "Good night." 刚好这一章结束在说晚安。月兰晚上好。 闭眼背书。哦，我刚刚往下看的时候眼睛闭起来了，是不是？好啦，今天差不多先这样了。各位睡了吗？真是蛮好睡的，醒了。阿爷还在画画，加油，辛苦了。还没睡了，醒了，好耶，晚安。Good night， 要跟你们说晚安咯。下礼拜再继续开哄睡台，把这本故事书念完。那我们今天就不要那么有活力的老师再见了。大家晚安，早点睡哦。我们明天见，晚安，拜拜，大家辛苦。